The one thing that we as activists, revolutionaries, whatever you want to call yourself, the one thing that we have to bear in mind is sometimes there's going to be a need to make people believe that you're feeding them what they're used to.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I say that is to something like the program that we do every week, Black Business Saturdays. Everybody say, oh man, you're supposed to be anti-capitalist. Why are you doing Black Business Saturday? I was like, because you don't understand the full scope of what we're doing.
Right.
We send the people to this business to endorse this Black business. But in turn, that Black business endorses the party and empowers us to continue to take care of the community.
Right.
You know, we had a massive fallout in a PE class a couple of weeks ago in regards to that, because there are several Panthers who want to start businesses, and there are several of our comrades from the White Panther Party who were present on the PE call who said, "But look, the thing that you can't do is you can't replace the oppressor with yourself. Seizing the means of production is not replacing the oppressor with yourself. What that's doing is actually putting the power back in the hands of the people. So once you put the power in the hands of the people, what you start to notice is that the whole mentality of people who've been oppressed for so long begins to change."
Evolving barbaric hieroglyphs, I spit my gifts, shift your surface with vernacular skill. The raw is near, touching down like meteors, none other than black gods. Stones in my timepiece coming from black stars. Negativity keep far away from doors. Single-mindedly destroying the ops and the odds. Just another warrior's quest. The past may get rest. Demons coming for my crown, get beheaded like the next. These blessings never rest, just to verbalize a message, catching energies of critics. All the Atari get deaded. Pray I stay alert on the field, be skillmatic in anything my enemies steal. Be dead actions, I proceed just life I lead. Beneath it, so many seas to win. It's our time to align stars, so spirits lead. Who could war with me, catastrophically or audibly? Given no choice by God's law, I'm Lucifer on streets.
I'm gonna mute everybody's sound real quick. All right, so protest as an expression or is as an expression or declaration of objection, disapproval, or dissent, often in opposition to something a person is powerless to prevent or avoid. In saying that, in essence, we are not really powerless, but the perception of powerless comes into hand as a result of our inability to recognize our political and collective power that we can have when we actually become involved in organizing on a mass level. So a lot of times though, when people are attracted to the idea of protest, is really their introductory into community politics and into community activism. So protests oftentimes is how people find themselves just getting involved, find themselves wanting to figure out what can be done in order to seek change in anything that's dealing with the system being oppressive. So I did want to bring that up. Next one here is rally, to draw or call people together for a common action or effort with the intent to maximize the concentration of strength. And it's separate, and a lot of times you hear these words exchange with one another, whether it be demonstration, rally, or protest, but they all do have a little bit of different approaches to them. And so it's important that we draw on that and make sure we recognize the difference. Because when you're rallying around something, typically may have a larger, like we said, maximizing concentration of people, versus a protest. It may not be, a protest could be something one person does by themselves, as well as a large group of people. And now demonstration, the gathering of people through a show of action, a stance against, or a stance to bring awareness to specific rights. By demonstrating the rights, it is meant to ignite public opinion and sway the masses to the same level of expression or use of legal free wills. For example, often marginalization has played a part in the lack of personal accountability, which has led to re-exposure for the sake of getting more people to push the envelope and holding enforcement responsible for the redistribution of police. And so when we talk about that, again, the key aspect here is that when we talk about things being marginalized, and then have to go through the concept of re-exposure. This is what we're going to, when later on, as we start getting into the idea of addressing identity and how that plays into it, is important, because oftentimes, more often than not, we keep seeing ourselves in a constant loop of addressing a problem. Next thing you know, things die down a little bit, and then a pattern restart and all over again, to where now we're dealing with the same protest again, for the same thing we've already protested for at one point in time, with no change whatsoever in terms of the level of oppression or the level of destruction that was applied to the victim. And so we find ourselves having to deal with the idea of re-exposure. So we're going to get a little bit into that and why those patterns continue as we go on. But it's important when you look at the three different ones here, whether we're talking about protest, rally, or demonstration, that they can play themselves out in different avenues, or different, should I say, different theaters of engagement. And so it's important that we recognize the difference between them. Whereas a demonstration oftentimes will be, you will bring out more information in regards to what is actually taking place. There are plenty of times when a protest is happening where the most you'll see is a few signs that people carry, and then, they may be yelling and saying a few things out loud, but oftentimes they may not necessarily be engaging the public at all. They're just simply expressing themselves in front of the public, which is why we use the concept and term here, expressing. Whereas in a rally, we say we're going to draw people. So a rally has more of a purpose or an intent, like we say, to maximize or bring together a large group of people. And then a demonstration will get more into the informational aspect about what is actually taking place, so that you can utilize and harness the power of the people that are in attendance. Let me go to the next slide here. And again, for y'all that just jumped on real quick before I move on, I chose this background and this backdrop of the monk burning themselves because, again, that was a form of protest that was taking place. And oftentimes it has been basically suppressed in terms of the media of that level of protest. And I mentioned when we first jumped on that on Earth Day, there was actually somebody, a dude from Colorado, I believe he was a monk, that actually set himself afire at the state capitol this past Friday and died of doing so. So that form of protest happens more often than a lot of people are aware of, but because of us in the United States and because of the desensitization, desensitizing of human life, oftentimes we don't see the significance of giving your life for a cause or a will, or the exposure of oppression, which is unfortunate, really. Mass mobilization, the synchronized unification of protests taking place across multiple areas, meant to galvanize a high concentration of people that would not normally take concern in how the issue of protest impacted them. And when we say that now, the deal here again between mass mobilization is basically you're working toward getting the public involved that normally may not even care about the news, normally may not care about what's really going on. So you actually are targeting the everyday people, not necessarily people that feel or have actually felt the actual same pain or actually have been touched by the same specific item or issue that you're protesting. But in fact, we're trying to get the average person, whether they have any skin in the game or not, to be involved. Now, the results of mass mobilization tend to generate waves of protest, which can serve to rise the protest effects to the level of direct action. And that's where we're going to start getting into that. Due to the amount of coverage, publicity, infrastructural impact, this tends to win favor for political and legal initiatives. And the reason for that is, you know, we live in a land of opportunists. And when you're dealing with opportunists, oftentimes having mass protests or dealing with a specific situation that tends to attract a lot of people in terms of their concern or just want to know what happened. Also, from a capitalist perspective, that is when you are able to utilize that energy of everybody's having everybody's attention to actually maybe win favor, like we say, for political and legal initiatives, because obviously now all of a sudden you're dealing with these attorneys and you're dealing with the news, and everybody wants to have coverage over this situation. And because everybody wants to have coverage, everybody wants to see some type of recourse taking place. And so when you deal with that recourse taking place, because of it being a mass mobilization surrounding the incident that's taking place, more people are out. You're more often out to get some type of justice. But like we stated earlier, that don't necessarily mean that justice is going to have an overall effect long term at all over the situation. Okay, so here in detail, a protest is a public expression of objection, disapproval, or dissent towards an idea or action. For the nature of this discussion, the focus is going to be on political. Protests can be thought of as acts of cooperation in which numerous people cooperate by attending and to share potential costs and risks of doing so. And that's one of the things about protests is that oftentimes, especially when you're dealing with people that are new to it, they feel that because they're coming out and knowing that in some degree you might get arrested, or family members may not approve of it, that they are putting themselves on the line, which raises their bar of just awareness of what happens, in that environment, in grassroots organizing. So protests can take many different forms, from the individual statements to galvanizing mass demonstrations, like we said earlier. The nature of protest involves a way of publicly making views and opinions heard in an attempt to influence public opinion or government policy to change for the good of humanity by way of collective mobilization again. And so when we say that and we talk about this as the concept of the nature of protest, it's important that we get that the nature of protest is about influencing public opinion. That is the essence what the nature of the protest is. Now, but when we say influencing public opinion, it does not necessarily mean that anything progressive may come of that from the standpoint of being long term. Because oftentimes, especially when we deal with protesting of incidents that may happen to individuals, and someone goes to jail behind it, so to speak, or even when we talk about someone losing their life, basically we're dealing with tick for tat oftentimes. And oftentimes the response to certain types of injustices are targeted in terms of how they address it. Should I say the government or those in power address it, is to keep it within the framework of being isolated incidents, even though we know that those of us that operate within the community all the time know that we're not dealing with isolated incidents. The idea behind that is that's how you take the girth or the fight or the power away from the people. Oftentimes is by saying somebody was injured or somebody was killed by another person. Well, by them being killed by another person or attacked by another person, if we seek justice and we take that person down that did the attack, now you negated it to a tit for tat situation. And so therefore, from the position of legality, then they would try to utilize that to say that, hey, justice has been served, but not addressing the fact that the environment in which creates this condition to where that same type of attack will continue to be perpetuated throughout society, and different people will see that same thing happen to them over and over again, is not addressed, which is in essence the reason why we developed the nature of protest in the first place, is because we want to be able to address things and put them to an end. We don't want to continue to be seeing the same thing over and over again. But in saying that, more work has to be done. So let's look at it from this standpoint. Often as a tactical component within protest, specific direct action is taken in an attempt to generate desired changes from the mobilization, where protests are part of a systemic and peaceful campaign to achieve a particular objective and involve the use of pressure as well as persuasion. Direct action tends to grow beyond the initial protest and reaches the position called civil resistance or non-violent resistance. And we're going to primarily address things from that standpoint as we move forward. But it is important to recognize that now we move from the realm of just simply talking about protest to showing a distinguished position when we get into what we call direct action. And that's important because oftentimes people that are new to, I guess, should I say, being involved in grassroots movement, being involved in any type of political change at that level, does not know to distinguish protest from direct action, or know how one evolves into the other. Anybody got any questions before I move on, or any comments or statements? All right, I keep going here. All right, so direct action originates as a political activist term for economic and political acts in which the actors use their power, whether it be economic, influence, or physical, to directly reach certain goals of interest, in contrast to those actions that appeal to others, which are authorities. For example, revealing an existing systemic problem that continues to plague society, using physical engagement, highlighting an alternative, or demonstrating the importance of a possible solution. Now, this is a thing that we really got to recognize here. Highlighting an alternative or demonstrating the importance of a possible solution. So the point being, when you talk about direct action, as it applies to that particular statement, the deal is to bring into a level of awareness that what is happening is a actual problem. And by it being an actual problem, now you want to bring up the possibility of solutions, or what it takes, or what life can be like if these things wasn't constantly occurring. So direct action places moral consequence up against the official law. It is the expression of the individual's readiness to fight, to take control of his or her life, and to try directly to act on the world that surrounds us, to take responsibility for one's own actions. And that's a quote here by Sam Bullock from a document here, What is Direct Action? Now, the importance of what they're stating here is that we're dealing with people taking responsibility for actions. And when you say that, it's not just the people that are protesting, so to speak, but what you're attempting to do is get the greater community, or the greater masses at large, aware of the fact that these kind of things that we're protesting about, these kind of things that we're engaging in to bring exposure to bring change to, is a result of most people not holding one another accountable. And so we have to be able to get the people to recognize that on a long-term basis. So next one here. So both direct action and action appealing to others can include nonviolent and violent activities that target persons, groups, or property deemed offensive to the active participants. Nonviolent direct action may include sit-ins, strikes, and counter economics. Violent direct actions may include political violence, assault, arson, street blockade, sabotage, self-defense, resistance to arrest, and property destruction. One thing I want to make known here is oftentimes people don't consider when we say self-defense to be a position of violent direct action, but self-defense is definitely can fall under that. Why? Because let's just take, for example, oftentimes, when is it that someone ends up getting killed by the police? The latest ones that you see is when they physically try to resist the arrest or defend themselves because they feel like they're basically being harmed for no justification by law enforcement. That ends up getting them killed. And so the idea of taking a defense, a stance of self-defense because of an injustice by law enforcement is considered by law enforcement to be a violent act. When you resist arrest, as far as law enforcement is concerned, at that point, you are committing violence. As crazy as that sounds. And it's because the way the law is written and the way things are expected is that you comply with law enforcement. Period, point blank, right or wrong, you comply. And because of us looking at things or the persons that are in that specific situation being emotionally involved in what's actually happening, I mean, looking at what's about to take place with their life, knowing that there is way out of control or is way unjustified in terms of just even being approached, because now we're talking about the aspect of the possibility of basically being approached simply because you're black or a minority in the first place when you wasn't doing the damn thing. Now you're recognizing all this, and so now your emotions are on high. With your emotions on high, you don't want to be touched. You don't want this person messing with you. You damn sure don't want them searching on you, and you don't want, and so you don't want to comply. As you not comply, what tends to happen oftentimes, especially if we're dealing with law enforcement that don't engage the community properly, do not really know the art of de-escalation as they should all be trained to deal with. What happens at that point is it starts escalating. As it starts escalating, next thing you know, again, now you resist an arrest. So now you you are engaging in what you refer to be as self-defense. And that self-defense will lead to now something, possibly happening to you. And so that's why I did want to bring that up as why self-defense and resistance to arrest falls under violent direct action. The actions can often move between a non-violent direct action to violent direct action or the reversal. And that's simply because based upon what we're talking about here, when we start dealing with sit-in strikes and especially counter economics, you are impacting the system. By impacting the system, you're taking money out of somebody's pocket. And when you do those kind of things, because the system of capitalism is built the way it is, it will oftentimes move things to the position of what we call counter protests or counter organizations or counter actions that are going to be coming against you, which in turn causes further actions to fall under the category now of violent direct actions. As a result of what? Dealing with the fact that now you're going to possibly be arrested for no particular real reason, and then doing that the arrest, if you deem it not to be righteous and you resist, now you move back into the form of violent direct action. And it's all kinds of way things can just slip up and take a turn for a higher level of intensity within even non-violent protests, being the nature of that protest. And that's why we also said earlier when we talk about the nature of protest, because if the protest from its nature and its inception is considered to be a non-violent protest or non-violent action, direct action, that does not mean that things will not turn into violence, as well as the same thing where someone may have the intent on going out and dealing with things from a position of violence, it turned to become non-violent. So it can happen both ways. So by contrast, electoral politics, diplomacy, and negotiation and arbitration are not usually described as direct action since they are electoral mandated. Nonviolent actions are sometimes a form of civil disobedience and may involve a degree of intentional law breaking where persons place themselves in arrestable situations in order to make a political statement, but other actions such as strikes may not violate criminal law. Let me go to the next slide here. Now, the essence of direct action is people fighting for themselves, rejecting those who claim to represent their true interests, whether they be revolutionaries or government officials. It is a far more subversive idea than civil disobedience because it is not meant to reform or influence state power, but meant to undermine it by showing it to be unnecessary and harmful. When people themselves resort to violence to protect their community from racist attacks or to protest their environment from ecological destruction, they are taking direct action. And it's important that we recognize that in terms of the essence of direct action, because the people at this point are, again, rejecting the ideas and the status quo of what's going on. Various forms of self-expression and protest are sometimes restricted by governmental policy, such as the requirements of protest permits, which here is not encouraged as it may conflict with the very nature of exercising our constitutional rights of assembly. Economic circumstances, religious, religious orthodoxy, social structures, or media monopoly. One state reactions to protests is the use of riot police. And this is important here when we talk about that. The increased militarization of protest policing must be noted, with police deploying armored vehicles and snipers against protesters. And we're seeing more and more increase of that. And as we see more increase of that, that's going to start affecting aspects of how direct action is implemented within the community. And so that's important that when we talk about direct action at that point, and we don't really have much time to get into that today, but the point here is that these kind of discussions must be had, especially amongst the various organizations, and methodologies must be put in place to see to it that we're not dealing with things and approaching things from an outdated perspective based upon the technological advances as well as the militarization of the oppressor as they are dealing with the people that are protesting and addressing their rights and how their rights should be dealt with. So when such restrictions occur, protesters may assume a form of civil disobedience that may spill over into other areas such as racism, culture, and immigration. This often moves into the realm of joint terrorism task force operations and homeland security. Now, the reason why I say that is often when protests start engaging in becoming what we said earlier, mass mobilizations, and you start getting mass mobilizations take place, that's going to go right back to the position of certain types of direct actions being able to economically cripple those that are implementing these forms of oppression across a society or across a people. And when you start doing that, now all of a sudden you fall under a different radar, and it's not just simply viewed as a group of organizers who may just simply be trying to address things on an individual level or a specific attack that took place that they're protesting, but they're actually going to the core of what's happening and want to address not just the symptoms, but the actual problems themselves that keep reoccurring. So when that takes place, now you are moving into a position to where you will be targeted as a result of your political, the political climate and the potential of you being able to take things to the higher level. Now, a protest itself may be at times subject to counter protests. This is important here on this note. In such cases, counter protesters demonstrate their support for the person, policy, or actions, etc., that is the subject of the original protest. Protesters and counter protesters will sometimes violently clash, and we see this often, and we see this all the time. So that's one aspect that we have to keep in mind. But let's talk about this on another level. Be aware of counter protests as a deplorable weapon originating from the opposition through social manipulation tactics. This can also include the launching of bogus protest demonstration or announcements with conflicting dates and times to confuse the masses and hinder effects or efforts of the movement. Now that's important. Let's talk a little bit about that real quick, because there's been times where we've all that are engaging in community activism on a day-to-day basis see that you see dates posted, and you try to determine, well, who said it's going to take place this day now? When did that get changed? Or what is this protest or event that's happening over here that I didn't hear nothing about? And then you come to find out that that was a bogus event, or that there was information that was misinformation that was supplied to create confusion, and thereby limit the amount of people that's going to take action at your events. And so know that, especially as it applies to social media, that these are oftentimes the tactics of whether it be the governmental entities or their subsidiaries, or counter protesters, or people that just don't literally, organizations that don't, or form that don't agree with whatever it is that you're fighting for. In the case of a recent situation we've been dealing with here dealing with Lakeside in Southern California, that goes into just combating racism across the board. So when you're engaging into something that's a social ill of the community, oftentimes those people that are at home with that social illness will launch and mount attacks against anything that's going to attempt to change their way of life. And that applies to just capitalism and imperialism in general. Power does not want to let go of power. That's just the bottom line. And racism from that standpoint is viewed by those that are operating through that racism a form of a privilege. And to remove that privilege from their arsenal is just not something a lot of them are willing to do. Because it's what keeps them on a pedestal. So let's talk about now social revolution. So social revolution takes place when the direct action becomes a way of life by enough of the population to create change in the social structure, bringing transformative conditions in favor of the political climate. This conditioning must be able to exist outside or without the oppressive signatures that held conductive to the triggers of social trauma. Otherwise, lasting benefits will not be achieved. And this goes into what I was getting at earlier. And what are all the objectives and aims of protests, rallies, and demonstrations and mass mobilization is to ultimately generate social revolution. That is what you want. Social revolution from that standpoint is how you go about making sure that the things that we are protesting or bringing to the light of will be addressed and will be tackled to the point to where we're not constantly seeing ourselves facing the same actual things over and over again. So when we talk about mobilizing, and we talk about organizing, make sure we are aiming for social revolution. So now with that, let me get into some of the processes involved in nonviolent direct action that are effective if sustained. And that's the key word. They are effective if sustained, which include 6 steps for nonviolent direct action. And this was adopted and modified from the essay Letter from Birmingham Jail by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Again, this was just used as a backdrop or a basis, but again, modified. Now, step 1. Now, what makes this important is those of us that are organizing and engaging in protests as a tactic, not a strategy, but as a tactic, must look at this from the standpoint of how you build your movement up to be able to make sure that the things and actions that you're engaging in are able to be maximized. So the first thing is information gathering. identify the issues in your community in need of positive change. To dissect the issue and resolve the problem or injustice facing a person, community, or institution, you must increase your honor, inner, and understanding of the problem. Now, let me explain that a little further. This is why we're saying to dissect the issue and resolve problems of injustice. The idea here is that the only way you're going to be able to go about this from a position of it creating a possibility of social revolution is to make sure that your information gathering and how you go about engaging the community is right on point with what needs to, right on point with really being able to identify the true problems and not symptoms. In order to do that, you have to inner, and understand what the problem really is. Your investigation should include all sides of the issue and must involve formal research. Keyword, all sides of the issue, and must involve formal research and listening to the experiences of others. And that's another thing that often does not happen as it applies to younger movements that are engaging in, whether it be protests or civil disobedience or direct action, is that oftentimes they're not dealing with things from a position of experience, or they're not actually doing formal or progressive research, which causes protest in itself to just be a culture of protest. So in ending that part here, don't be emotionally attached to the events in which when seeking facts, because when you're emotionally attached to the situation when you're seeking facts, then it is very easy for something to just simply be your a truth or your reality, whereas it's not necessarily really a problem that needs to be addressed or can be addressed by your involvement if you're not approaching it from the correct point of view or the correct perspective. Step 2 here, educate others. It is essential to inform others, including your opposition. You hear that? Including your opposition about the collective problem. In order to cause change, the people in the community must be aware of the issues and understand its impact. By educating others, you will minimize misunderstanding and gain support of allies. Be solution-based in all that you stand for. Be loyal in principle and organization. Now, one thing that does not happen often is that when you deal with the education or educating the public about what's going on, is actually taking a specific interest into educating the opposition. And now the importance of that, especially, and let me just use the concept of racism as a point of reference for that. Racism typically is taught, period, point blank, and is usually taught by older racist generation that teach their children to be racist, and then they continually pass it on and they reinforce it. And when you reinforce something like racism through the lens of racial superiority, what tends to happen is you have to come up with stories, concepts, and justifications that don't necessarily logically add up. And this is why you keep going, a lot of times they always go back to the whole concept of Darwinism and how certain types of quote unquote racial or ethnic groups may be more logically or intellectually more inferior than others, which there is no valid proof whatsoever of that at all. So it starts out with a lie. By starting out with a lie, then what happens is it builds up the situation to where that one group or that one class feels like they are the quote unquote chosen ones. And this is where religion gets into the situation and also is used to weaponize the people against themselves, as well as prop certain groups on a pedestal, which just reinforces the positions of racism in the first place, whether it be done intentionally or not. And so from that standpoint, when you deal with educating your opposition, oftentimes you may end up exposing them to a form of critical thinking and logic that has escaped them through their younger years, And by the time they reach adulthood, this is just how things are. And it has become an accepted and a expected practice. Whereas being educated on it from the position of seeing things from all sides, seeing things for how they really are versus your narrow point of perception, then you may often win them over in terms of just the ignorance that led and bled into them carrying on that behavior pattern that, you know, is obviously something that should be changed when we talk about of humanity in itself. So that's why it's important to educate others as we deal with this. Any questions or comments before I keep moving? I do want to get some kind of engagement from y'all.
No, it's a good point. I feel like a lot of people don't see the need in educating, especially the opposition, from a standpoint of just us versus them, you know, kind of also we don't negotiate.
You dropped out.
You hear me?
Go ahead. I think I can hear you.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Basically, I don't really ever see that happening. But I do feel like it's important to educate everyone, because everyone kind of, well, not everyone, but people do come in with their preconceived idea of, you know, what's going on and why they're there. So if you don't give them the information, then everyone's just going to jump to whatever conclusion that they came with.
Right. All right. Appreciate it, Chief. Anybody else before I move on? All right. Let's go into number 3 here. Step 3. Personal commitment. Check and affirm your identity meets the philosophy and the methods of action. Develop a platform for goals for your cause. Prolonged change requires dedication and long hours of work. Meet with others regularly to stay focused on your goals. Prepare yourself to accept sacrifice in your work for justice. Now, let me go back to this first part here. Check and affirm your identity meets with the philosophy and the methods of action. And this is where we start talking about the concept of how identity plays into what's actually taking place. And we have to address it from this position, because if you're going to deal with this from a level of what we say here, personal commitment, and being able to prepare yourself for sacrifices and long work and enduring hardship, the idea here, and we addressed this again going back to earlier when I referenced the idea of revolutionary suicide, we are addressing this to the position of knowing that if you are wanting to commit to lasting change, then you yourself need to commit to lasting involvement. And one of the misconceptions, and it's unfortunate that a lot of people have as it applies to seeking justice and feeling like justice should prevail and righteousness should prevail, should I say, is that simply because it's the right thing to do is going to take place eventually. And that is just not the reality of the way the world operates. It takes involvement. It takes putting yourself in a long-term personal commitment to keep things moving in a progressive direction, because the nature of, should I say, oppression as it applies to the way it's infiltrated, enforced, and disseminated across the population, those that are in position to benefit from it are not wanting to let go of that privilege, let go of that way of life. No matter how what level it's on. And that's another thing that oftentimes escapes a lot of people when they remain in a victimization, is that there is degrees of what we call privilege. Whether we talking about white privilege, privilege of authority, privilege of finances, or whatever, there are degrees of privilege. As people move up those tiers of privilege, or societies or communities move up those tiers of privilege, they get embedded and bought, and they buy into those levels of privilege. This is the whole point of classism, and how classism is able to use to enforce the top tier bracket, which is racism. Everything stems from the concept of racism as it goes, and then it works its way down. From the standpoint of addressing things in the position of privilege, those that are in those positions, those are receiving those perks, don't want to let go of whatever tier or level that they're operating from willingly. Now, when I say willingly, it's at that current state of consciousness most of the time, and indulging in involving themselves within that, they stay steadfast in where they are because they are comfortable, or they know that they're more comfortable but then the ones that are below them. And so often people, especially when you apply this as it comes across to the individuals, don't want to let that go. And so it takes, more and more commitment, and more of us, and more people showing the benefit, especially as it applies to when you get into the idea of environmental issues, and the idea of what damage is being actually done to the planet by humanity, and start talking about Earth's carrying capacity and things that those address, that you open the eyes up that, don't just simply be so selfish that you're only looking at things from your current generation, and not the fact that future generations are going to suffer from your ignorance, or suffer from your stupidity or ego. And so personal commitment is something that should be viewed upon as being a long-term thing if you are engaging yourself in protest, engaging yourself in action, especially direct action. So those people oftentimes that first get their introduction into protest don't come with these steps, and typically don't realize that this personal commitment really comes into place. Step 4, negotiations. Using grace, intelligence, and humor, engage individuals who need to participate in this change. Discuss a plan for addressing and resolving these injustices. Look for what is positive in every action and statement the opposition makes. Do not seek to humiliate the opposition, but call forth the good of the opponent. Look for ways in which the opponent can become an ally. Use the strategy of de-escalation at any given opportunity to bring down the guard of your target is very useful, and know that they will aim to do the same to you. So being aware of that in terms of as it applies to de-escalation as a tactic within the operation of protest is very important, especially when you deal with the fact that a lot of people that may be attracted to the situation are attracted simply because something emotionally within them connects them with what it is they're being involved in for the first time, or being involved in that is hit close to home this time around. So it's usually their emotions that they're leading with. Okay, and by leading with your emotions, oftentimes you are viewing the opposition as the epitome of wrong, and it may not necessarily be the case. It may just be going right along with what I'm saying about a tier of privilege that needs to be addressed, that needs to be brought to light, that needs to be corrected. But those tiers are fashioned in such a way to where they're weaponized against each and every other tier. And that's what a lot of times most people don't recognize about social engineering, is that The way social engineering operates is that each one of these subgroups are, by the way they design and by the way they operate, help reinforce that subgroup from ever linking up with other subgroups. And it's basically winning through chaos. Next one here. Step 5. These are actions taken to convince, direct action. Going in step 5 is the direct action. These are steps, actions that are taken to convince others to work with you in resolving the injustice. Direct action impose a creative tension into the conflict. Direct action is most effective when it illustrates the injustice it seeks to correct. Examples of direct action include marches, rallies, town halls. For the sake, and I emphasize this here, for the sake of gathering more people to engage in action. Now let me stop there real quick, because now what we're saying here, and this goes back to the difference between addressing marches, rallies, or protests as a culture, because in essence what these are supposed to do is gather more people to engage in action, and that specifically would be direct action. So what you're doing at that point is you're congregating and gathering people that are recognizing whether this is either important, I have a self-interest in it because it has happened to someone close to me, or I don't want this to happen to the next generation, or for whatever reason, they recognize that there needs to be some amount of my input and some amount of my involvement to see to it that we can actually have a sustainable way to prevent these things from continuing, even if it's just lowering the percentage. But the more people that are involved, the point being, the better the action. So when you engage in marches, rallies, in town halls, the whole point is making sure you are able to not capitalize, I hate to use that word, but in essence, you're able to seize the time, as we say in the Panther Party, seize the time and get more people involved. And it's not necessarily trying to get them involved in your specific organization or your specific take, but it's getting people politicizing the masses, and so that certain things just can't, continue to happen the way they are. This is also why the Panther Party say all power to the people. One of the reasons why. So when we are establishing these marches, rallies, or town halls, we are doing so to get the people that show up to be engaging in direct action, to get them involved in the work that needs to be done. The next element here, social media, informational and exposure writings, videos, and petition campaigns. Now, when we talk about that, it's important because this goes right back to the idea of making people aware of what's happening, right? So you want to project and create exposure through writings and through videos. And what's very important here is developing petition campaigns. Why? Because now you move into the ability to be able to create legislative actions that are going to have an impact that will bring things to a position of creating or retracting laws that are on the books that continue to allow things to perpetuate on a level that shouldn't be going on. So that's one of them. The next one here will be blockades and boycotts. Refusal to buy products. Economic warfare is a very powerful weapon against capitalists and the systems of systematic racism that is underutilized by the current generations. Now let me stop and talk about that, and I do want some input on this one, because I think, again, like we're stating here, is the idea of blockades and boycotts. This is a powerful weapon, because when you talk about capitalism, you talk about imperialism, you talk about control, especially as it applies to the Black community, we find ourselves caught up in a vicious cycle of consumerism. And that cycle of consumerism tends to cause us to not be active in means of production, which means of production puts us in positions of self-sufficiency. So as you get caught up in this vicious cycle of not being able to address capitalism, or not being able to deal with things as it applies to seeing how oppression lands on you, and how oppression continues to embed itself in you. Then when you talk about boycotts, then when you talk about hitting them in the pocketbooks, then when you talk about crippling the economic factors that are taking place that allow them to continue to take advantage of you, from that position, what happens is now you're approaching power from the position of power. And we need to, as a people, as organizers, start utilizing that power. Because when you take economics, when you take resources away from those that are oppressing you, it automatically takes away the resources from those that are oppressing you, that oppress you. It has a direct effect on your ability to be able to operate at a higher level of organizing, at a higher level of freedom, and a higher level of liberation. So why is it that we don't see enough of this taking place? Because we have taught to be consumers first and foremost. And the idea of coming out of the mode of being a consumer plays right into the hand of why we find ourselves being oppressed in the first place. So oftentimes as we organize and as we protest, but then still hold on to the same value systems that continue to keep us in bondage by being pure consumers versus being producers, then we will not see power respect us, because we're not coming from a position of power. Can I get somebody else to speak a little bit on that aspect, on their thoughts? I want to hear from somebody. Somebody say something. Okay, I know some people are at work. Not all y'all at work. Go ahead, Brother Bunchy, if you can talk.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I absolutely positively agree with everything you just said, because we actually, it's crazy that you just said that, because we just had a massive debate amongst our rank and file members that I was privy to in regards to consumerism and taking back the means of production. The one thing that we as activists, revolutionaries, whatever you want to call yourself, the one thing that we have to bear in mind is sometimes there's going to be a need to make people believe that you're feeding them what they're used to.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I say that is something like the program that we do every week, Black Business Saturdays. Everybody say, oh man, you're supposed to be anti-capitalist. Why are you doing Black Business Saturday? I was like, because you don't understand the full scope of what we're doing.
All right.
We send the people to this business to endorse this Black business. But in turn, that Black business endorses the party and empowers us to continue to take care of the community.
Right.
We had a massive fallout in a PE class a couple of weeks ago in regards to that, because there are several Panthers who want to start businesses, and there are several of our comrades from the White Panther Party who were present on the PE call, who said, "But look, the thing that you can't do is you can't replace the oppressor with yourself. Seizing the means of production is not replacing the oppressor with yourself. What that's doing is actually putting the power back in the hands of the people. So once you put the power in the hands of the people, what you start to notice is that the whole mentality of people who've been oppressed for so long begins to change. Our consumerism is dangerous. It's very dangerous, because that's why boycotts haven't been successful, especially in recent years, because people are so trained to be consumers, they don't realize that they can cut that tie. And by cutting that tie, they change the power dynamic in that relationship. I just wanted to add that on, man. I mean, you're killing it right now, so I really didn't feel the need to say that. But yeah.
No, I appreciate you coming in, because you just added, more perspective on the same note, and oftentimes just hearing it in a different way will reach different people and strikers. So one thing I do want to say in regards to what you're saying about the economics, internal economics, is the separation of consumerism whereas we are caught in this vicious cycle of buying for the sake of buying. It gets into the psychology of how we have been emotionally trained to spend money when we are hurt, spend money when we're feeling good, spend money when we don't know what to do. It's a cycle that continually attaches itself to emotional instability and emotional immaturity. That is completely different than the position of having a purpose in raising finances and raising funds. You see, that is where I think that the message in that may get dropped, is because one is done with a tactful purpose of building resource through the mechanisms, whereas the other one is just a subconscious action that takes place that has no accountability. And so what happens is people are looking at symptoms and not able to identify the fact that symptoms can oftentimes be shared amongst progressive ways of maneuvers and things that are not progressive. Because you can have symptoms, but symptoms don't necessarily mean that this is what it's leading to. A person can cough because they got something stuck in their throat. You can also be coughing because you got AIDS. Just because I got something caught in my throat don't mean I'm developing AIDS. But it's the same symptom, a cough. So me exchanging money is a symptom, but that don't mean I'm a capitalist, because I'm engaging in economic exchange. And I'm not only that, what I'm doing at that point is I'm doing it through a purpose, through a means. And see, this also goes into what I was saying earlier about how you create these tiers. And what are we talking about? A tier from this position of economic, or a tier from a position of a status, or a tier from a position of how we view things through the lenses of mental, spiritual, and physical. When we operate as individuals through these different tiers in these different lenses, it causes us to view symptoms as one and the same. And so we have to recognize from that standpoint, and then I'll move on, is that we are on a battlefield that has conditioned us to work against each other, and that has conditioned us to not be able to dissect, which is why we said that on one of the earlier steps, dissect the actual situations and conditions that are happening within our community, so that when we engage in direct action, we know what we're doing. This is also why we have to approach things from a position of identity. And so your movement must have an identity that prevents it from operating the same way the oppressor would operate, for the same reasons the oppressor would operate. But if you don't have an identity up front, you will find that you will emulate down to the T the same exact social ills. That's why identity must come first. And then I'll move on here. Political action, the next one here. Political action inclusive of developing and lobbying legislation, developing and promoting political candidates from within your pool of leadership, and voting. Self-determination is the end goal, but without knowing and utilizing the practice of structure of politics, knowing self through collective work can't be feasible future. Now, I want us to talk a little bit about this one, because oftentimes, especially within Panther formations, we find ourselves fighting oftentimes against political action to the point to where it renders us incapable of recognizing what it takes to even engage in what we call ourselves working towards, and that's self-determination. Because self-determination goes into self-governance. Governance goes into politics. You cannot develop a system of governance to even replace the current system of governance that is oppressing you if you hate it so much that you don't even know how to study it. And so that's one of the aspects of it that continue to make things perpetuate on a level of ignorance, is that we claim that we don't want to be involved in capitalism. We claim that we don't agree with imperialism and levels of oppression, and at the same time, we're not doing anything to educate ourselves on how these systems operate, to the point of being able to make sure that as we develop ourselves, we know what it's about. Go ahead, brother Buncher. Let me let you jump in.
I don't want to hog the PE call, brother, but what
Go
you're saying
do
right
it.
now is striking the nut. Like, okay, so you're absolutely right, because one of the things that I just said to the comrades last week was, you know why it feels like we're not making traction? Because we're not in a position as a community at the moment to exact the political consequence should something not go the way we want it to. The reason why Asians were able to get what they needed so quickly when that Stop Asian Hate mess was going on, okay, because they were in a position as a community to exact the political consequence because of their current position in the economic cycle of America. They were able to do that, and because they were able to do that, they were able to get the laws on the books that they needed right away. And not only that, but they were not only able to get the laws on the books, but those laws were being enforced. There have been plenty of laws passed because of civil rights movements and marches and sit-ins. But the thing is, after we get the victory, what is perceived as a victory, should I say? When we get what is perceived as the victory, we start to back off. And now there's no political consequence. So they can say, well, the law's on the books, but we have no reason to enforce it because you're not in a position to inflict any type of consequence on us. You're not going to stick to a boycott long enough. When the Colin Kaepernick thing happened, I was like, word, I stopped watching football, no problem. Bloop, stop watching. Within 2 seasons, all of the people who were with me that said we was going to stop watching football, I was like, man, did you see the game? Did you see? I was like, oh, y'all bugging. Really? You couldn't stop watching football for 2 years? So, I mean, our inability, or what has been shown to be our inability to stick to our guns when it comes to matters such as that, as far as anything that involves having to have unity across a large number of Black people. Our failure to execute those things the way that we should has led us to being in this position amongst all the other ethnic groups in this country of not being able to exact the political consequence. And as long as we stay in that position, we're going to be stuck. So that's why we had Panthers from our formation that ran for city council last time. We had one that ran for mayor. They didn't win, but the fact that they ran allowed us to spread our message further. And now we are in a greater position, especially right here in Tacoma, to start moving in a direction of exacting a political consequence should things not change to the degree that we need them to.
Man, thank you for that. Thank you for that, because that's recognizing obviously the bigger picture. And oftentimes we are not politically astute enough to see that. Anybody else want to add to that or recognize the power of what was just said?
I wanted to jump on that. That goes back to when he was talking about people buying stuff just to buy stuff because that's how they were taught. It goes into the whole situation that happened with Gucci and H&M, and people tried to boycott it for a second, but then something they like comes out and they just completely forget what they were standing for.
Yeah, revert right back into our habitual patterns. You know, that's why we talked about that within our skill level 1 training when we dealt with neurolinguistic programming. We have been conditioned that as a people, as a society, that's social engineering. And most folks don't recognize how psychology has been weaponized against a population to the point to where it's targeted right down to the very things that create your appetite or attraction. You know, and to me, that's just going back and studying MK Ultra. You know, and then you study MK Ultra, and if you really look at MK Ultra in terms of all of the thousands of pages that have been released, it is mind-blowing. Some of the aspects of some of the breakthroughs that was discovered in terms of social engineering that's being implemented on a day-to-day basis on the population without them being aware of the effects of it. All right, I go to the next one here. Public art and performance, changing the influence, which is what I was just talking about, or appetite of our music and motion picture, taking back control of our culture and not allowing capitalists to feed us foolish nonsense. And that's important, because the aspect here is what dumbs down a population, it's dumbs down a society. And oftentimes, music and video are used to continue to reinforce our behavior patterns to be attracted to things that are not doing anything about raising our conscious level of growth. And what happens with this is when we caught in a vicious cycle of always wanting to watch something that is not doing anything to actually exercise your brain, then your brain becomes lazy. Your brain becomes conditioned to like these type of things. And as it likes these type of things, its ability to critical think and its ability to associate itself away from what we was talking about earlier, being the consumer or consumption product, to something that is producing, is basically going to take hold. In order to be a producer, it goes into being able to be a visionary. In order to being able to be a visionary, that goes into how you perceive the world and how you can see innovation and have ingenuity in terms of thought process. And when we are not exposing ourselves to mental discipline, not exposing ourselves to mental dexterity, which means trial and error and forcing yourself to actually learn something new on a day-to-day basis, you are not equipped to escape the process of being a consumer. Because the mentality that it takes to be able to even be aware long enough that this is a lifestyle change that we have to endure in terms of being able to be effective in fighting oppression is just not gonna resonate. Again, you'll be moved by being an emotional charged act, but emotions cannot carry you through a lifestyle change. It may get you started, but it can't carry you through it. So, and then I'm stating here for more information in regards to taking back control of our appetite for how we listen to music in motion picture. The Gospel of Hip Hop, the first instrument by KRS-One. That's a very good book, just on the philosophical and spiritual aspects and cultural aspects of what hip hop and music should really mean. And then Professor Grip breaks down the psychological covert war on hip hop and lets you know just how aspects of control are implemented to dumb down the population and to prop up stupidity and foolishness and get the population basically drunk on that, and the population associated with that. And the same thing happens through all form of media. But that's just an example. Now the next one here, number 6, reconciliation. Nonviolence seeks friendship and understanding. Nonviolence does not seek out individual confrontation as the end to suffering. Nonviolence is directed against evil systems, oppressive policies, and just acts, not against persons. It states this, the operations of poverty, in stating this, the operations of poverty pimping must come to an end. Only power wins the respect of power. Now, it's important to address this because when we talk about reconciliation, when we talk about a lot of the perceptions of nonviolent action, you think about those same people. Not only do you think about, but what you see coming to the forefront when we think nonviolence are the poverty pimps. And so we're drawing a distinction between the idea of engaging the people in the awareness of methodologies that will work to build, not destroy. See, now we're talking about the difference between building and destroying, because the idea when we talk about being able to be in control of our means of production, that is a position of building something. And so when you're building something as it applies to that, now we're dealing with methodologies that take away from consumerism and methodologies that also puts us in positions of addressing things through a specific means of being non-violent and non-destructive internally. So I'm also making sure we recognize the flip upon whether we address something through non-violent means of seeking justice versus non-violent means of operating injustice. So it's a difference. And so we have to see that. This is which side of the fence you on. And in saying that, violence as direct action. The discussion of violent direct action would not be discussed as it contradicts the nature of a public forum and open up unnecessary targeting. That should be obvious, that I'm not going to sit here and rant about certain types of things. But know that violent direct action should be studied by all that recognize the nature of warfare, if for no other reason to be familiar with tactics that will be deployed against the organizations and the people that seek true political change in fighting oppression and suppression of freedoms and equalities by any means necessary. So what we're saying here is that you have to be holistic in your awareness, holistic in your approach, holistic in your means of raising yourself and your consciousness to be able to be more effective in the field, so that it will attract progression and it will attract consistency. Going back to what Comrade Bunchy was talking about, to where we are able to stay steadfast in what we stand for. That's why that also falls right back into the identity aspect of what we are. Does someone have something they want to add to that? All right, I keep going here. The political combative recourse, and this is basically talking about what they use against us. Since we're talking about violent direct action, and we're talking about the fact that the opposition is just not going to let things go the way it's, go a certain way without something. So the political combative recourse of social revolution, which is what we are working toward, is to isolate the victories and our organizers from the general population and limit the demands of change by drawing a cloud of judgment to specific personalities involved, and perform character assassinations in order to weaken the actual works. And so by doing this, they tend to get you to focus on personalities versus focusing on the works that need to be done, or the works that's getting done. And by focusing on personalities, now we start finding individual flaws, because nobody's perfect. And as you find individual flaws, now you may start associating character weaknesses with the weakness or the perceived to be weakness of the actual movement or thing that you're attempting to change. There is really no association. But through psychological warfare, if I get you to focus on a personality or a flaw within a personality, then subconsciously we tend to equate a personality flaw within an individual with a flaw within the idea or the concept, which is attempting to be being changed or attempting to be addressed. So we draw in these associations, and by drawing in these associations that shouldn't be there and shouldn't conclude and shouldn't connect with one another, that again goes right back to certain levels of dysfunctionality that the different tier groups or the different or like I said earlier, privileged groups share in order to keep them separate from each other. And that's again social engineering. So we have to be aware of how the recourse to social revolution works. With aiding the passing of time and utilizing the effects of emotional neutralization, that's important here, dealing with the emotional neutralization, the masses tend to forget the historical markers and fall back into the conditions prior to the exposure of protests or direct actions. This can also leave organizers open to attacks at higher levels, often involving false charges, legal allegations, in order to kill off the spirit of the protest, which allows the cycle of generational sleep. This is what Bunchy was basically saying earlier. This powerful social engineering deployment keeps the people in time loops of revisiting the same tactics without knowledge of the prior action campaigns and the congruent assaults. Due to traumatized participants going to sleep and not connecting with younger generations. So another way of breaking all that down is basically as a way to combat our ability to be able to galvanize the people and our ability to be able to move to higher levels. What we find is them targeting our ability as mass mobilization to keep the people engaged and involved and educated and aware of how the things that we're addressing, that we're bringing to the table in terms of fighting oppression is important as a lifestyle change. That's the key here, is that it has to be viewed as a lifestyle change. If we're not willing to make lifestyle changes, then what happens is you deal with the effects of being emotionally neutralized. And that's the point, because addressing it from that position, we will not have the ability to keep this going. And those that will attempt to keep it going, again, will be killed off. And they talk about here, we say here, killing off the spirit of protest, which allows the cycle of generational sleep, which means that one generation that put in a lot of hard work to get a certain level or get certain things going, another generation that comes behind that did not continue that same level of agitation, that same level of work, that same level of victory, that same level of accomplishment. So then we fall back. And as we fall back from what we've gained, now we're right back in the same cycle again.
That reminds me of who was talking about that? I believe it was Daruba. When he was talking about how, you know, we out here, people are out here fighting for stuff that, you know, and they don't even know the fight on certain things has already been won, because they just so out of touch with the actual context of, you know, what was really going on and what really got accomplished.
Right. One thing to look at as it applies to that goes right back into how we started, and that has to do with the culture of protest. Oftentimes, and we can even say this, there has been organizations that have basically been birthed out of the movement of protest. And these organizations and these people have basically utilized protest as their means of existence. And when that happens, then it's like fighting a war for the sake of fighting war. It's not fighting a war for the sake of peace or for the sake of an end result or for the sake of ending conflict. You're fighting for the sake of fighting. And in doing so, you're not engaging in any specific action for the sake of an actual recourse or a resolve or a solution. You're simply fighting for the spirit of fighting. And we get caught up in that. That is emotionalism when that happens. But emotional charge in itself can be addictive. So the addictive nature of being emotionally charged, of being excited, of being on the edge itself develops and becomes the culture of protest. And when it does that, no longer is protest a tactic. Now it is the strategy. Now it has become what you are. And everything that you engage in is a matter of having something to engage in for the sake of protest. So we literally go flip it upside down, backwards, and sideways. And that is how a generation of people can get lost and not even know how to begin to connect with the elder generation, because the substance that created the conflicts that were being battled and challenged in the first place has left the building. There is no substance. At this point, it's like chewing gum after the taste is gone. You're just caught up in a pattern and a habitual cycle of chewing. You know damn well you should have spit that gum out an hour ago, but you're still chewing that same gum because you're caught up in the cycle of just that repetitive action. And that's what we find ourselves going right back to when we said the aspect of consumerism. It plays out mentally, physically, and spiritually all across the board. It plays out to us as individuals. When we talk about the trifactors, it plays out in our family structures, and it plays out in how we engage in community activism. So what we're drawing here and what we're showing, hopefully, to all of us, we're able to take something away from this and recognize how important it is that when we deal with the science of protest, that everything has a means, everything has a purpose, everything has a place. And so as we move forward, let's talk about the identity of it, just so we can go further into why that's important. So the identity of a movement. It is critical to know why identity is the most important part of any movement. This is what defines the very nature of the intent of the actions. Often the same tactics that can be shared between movements with totally polar opposite identities. So to the untrained or unseasoned participant and unconscious or unaware public, it can all be meshed into one big rally that invites any and everyone to the front line. The obvious danger in this lack of judgment by the organizers is that it will bring compromise in areas that should not be watered down for the sake of numbers. The power of raw spirit that should be harnessed for the sake of touching the people's emotion to action ratio will get lost in the buildup of consecutive actions, and consecutive actions will be siphoned off, leading to less power to bring about change or justice for a cause. Now let's talk about what we highlighted here. Emotion to action ratio. It ain't too often that people draw that connection when it comes to protests, or draw that connection when it comes to seizing the time. Because if we are to, as organizers and grassroots movers and Panthers and whatever we do in the community, if we are to be able to increase our ability to impact our cause, we have to look at the emotion to action ratio, because too often that is ignored. And because somebody is able to be passionate in the moment, we tend to view that as a plus, or we tend to view that as an attractive thing to engage in, not recognizing that that emotion has to have a specific means of actually manifesting itself to some type of action that's going to be equivalent in terms of the amount of energy or the amount of connectivity or conduction that is equated to the emotional content that was released in the first place. So when that doesn't happen, or when we fail to recognize this formula, we set ourselves up for destruction. And this is why, again, we as organizers have to be studious. And oftentimes, you even, I think it's used over too much in a negative way when we say so much, keep it plain or keep it simple. The problem with that is that, again, the lack of our ability to critically think, the lack of our ability to raise our bar of awareness, raise our bar of thinking, raise our bar of pushing ourselves to higher levels of accountability, has been watered down, has been dumbed down for the sake of just dealing with masses. And when we do it to that degree, we will never increase in terms of what we are. So therefore, our emotion to action ratio will not get to where it needs to go. Does anybody got something to add to that, or aware of that concept of emotion to action ratio?
Oh yeah, I feel that one in my bones right there. Just compared to just going through these election cycles and all these blanket movements, you know, and seeing what comes out of it when the dust settles, and just the emotional traction of, you know, the average brother and sister that's in the street, and the quote unquote rise of, you know, political consciousness just to be dumbed down again by the saturation of manufactured action.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, you know, and going into the part before with the personalities, and then you got the you know, the whole BLM thing, you know, falling apart with the, you know, a few people spending money crazy and whatnot. It's very easy to kind of shuffle that movement around.
Right.
Right. Exactly where they want it, so
Yep.
to speak. You know, police budgets increase, People start getting less active. People get tired of the protest. So it's all very, very clear.
Yeah, it becomes clear at that point when we take a step back as organizers and see what's going on. But it don't become. But let's say this, and then I let Bunchy jump in. It ain't clear when we talk about the untrained, or unseasoned, and unconscious, or unaware public, because again, that's how things get meshed all into one. And next thing you know, you got a whole bunch of people moving in this one direction that have no idea what the hell they really doing. Go ahead, brother Bunchy.
Oh, that you just said something, brother Karan just said something that made me think. When you said something about the Black Lives Matter thing and how it got, they basically torching it. It's falling apart because of the misappropriation of money, all that other stuff. Okay, cool. But the thing is, they put that in front of you and show you that, as opposed to showing you, if you take away the organization Black Lives Matter, so many things have been pushed forward and pushed in a positive direction behind that mantra, because people believe in the statement, not necessarily the organization. So all of the things that have occurred behind that statement, behind the power behind that statement, and the moves that people have made behind the power of that statement have been washed away by simply saying, hey, this organization, because it's called Black Lives Matter, and the reason why you're running around doing all that, these people did ABC. Right. So now, like you said, people start backing off. They don't want to come to the protest. They don't want to show up. They don't want to make the phone call. They don't want to send that email, because now they feel like their entire emotional, the entire thing that they poured their emotion into was a waste of energy. So therefore, if you feel like you drained the purpose from the emotion, then you dead the action every single time. So that, and then like you said, going back to personalities, the most simple way to put that, especially with it being a Panther call, the easiest way to look at that is very simple. They try to dispel any good that the Black Panther Party did simply because of Huey's addiction. They raised Huey to a certain point and then utilize his demons to demonize the entire party. Yeah. So when you start falling victim to that, or when we start seeing that occurring, that's why I always make it a point to say to everybody in our party, hey, bro, look, the news coming. I talked to them last time you talked. It don't need to be about me, because it's not about any of us. It's about the people. But they're going to make it about you, because if they can find a way to destroy you, they feel like they can destroy the movement. So,
Yep, absolutely, brother. And propping up individuals. And also, I feel like with the movement, specifically the Black Lives Matter movement, it took the identity, so far apart from, the average brother and sister, that I feel like Black people just at some point just didn't even see themselves in it anymore. And it became oh, that's their thing, you know what I mean? Like, that's for the blue hair folks or whatever.
Facts. I feel you.
You know what I mean? So it's like, you go to the hood, we're like, oh, that's fine and dandy, but we still got these issues, and we got, you know what I mean? So they just completely separated I feel like the original intent of the identity of the movement and polarized it to where it became, like some angry blue hair trans white girl.
Yeah, let me speak on that real quick, and then move on to the next point. The thing about that, let's also reflect that as it applies to FBI targeting what they refer to as Black identity extremism. I'm addressing and bringing up identity with y'all because I need everyone to definitely start soaking in on how important identity is to a movement. The reason why the FBI targeted that, the reason why CIA came after that, the reason why the government pinned the US organization against the Black Panther Party was to separate a means of having a solid identity from the works that are being done in the community. So when you look at Black identity extremism and all that it means, and you look at an organization that called themselves Black Lives Matter, all of a sudden, when you find a way to manipulate that and make it something bad, then subconsciously, Black Lives Mattering is bad. You see, so it is very easy to weaponize a population against its cause, through the cause, by pulling and extracting individual acts and tying that back into the overall reason and the overall movement, and showing parallels that really don't exist. And this is able to be done because most of us operate from being emotionally charged. Most of us operate from a lower level of critical thinking than what we should be operating from. And most of us operate from a position of consuming versus a position of producing. And so because of these things that has been utilized against us through social engineering, we find ourselves victimized and easily falling for the same traps. This is why, going back to one of the reasons why we have these classes here and why the Panther Party is emphasizing political education and refer to this as political education, is because the masses of the people must be brought aware of the things that are used to continue to perpetuate certain levels of stupidity and certain levels of ignorance within the population. Because by us not knowing this, by us not knowing that we're at war, by us not recognizing the effects of social engineering and how it is deployed upon a population intentionally, we continue to have to make ourselves victims of our own life and our own lifestyle. So let me say this one here. Because true identity was not established, going back to what we talked about here in the identity of a movement, the assumption that a people can organize behind an action of collective hurt becomes the buildup to keep the organizers engaged. This shell without sail will bewilder all involved and lead to channels of lost souls seeking an identity of purpose as opposed to purpose for identity. Let me say that last part again. The shell without a sail will bewilder all involved and lead to channels of lost souls seeking an identity of purpose as opposed to purpose for identity. And this is how it's easily manipulated and easily utilized against a population that is just not politically aware or politicized in terms of what it means to deal with self-determination, what it means to deal with true essence of politics, because we've been told to be turned off about that. In order to counter this cycle of going nowhere, the San Diego Black Panther Party and most Black Panther formations across the country has a structure, if respected and implemented, can assist with the prevention of this lost legacy from repeating. And it's simple in terms of the way it's laid out. To define what is in the best interest of people, we must first perceive. To develop what is in the best interest of the people, we must first actively pursue. This is why we're talking about protest. We must actively pursue. To defend what is in the best interest of people, we must readily preserve. By directing the equilibrium of identity, the resistive movement is defining the future state of growth and stability. This means meeting the needs of reaching the masses for outgrowth will require the movement to continually influence the ingrowth or lessons learned from previous actions or assemblies. And in order to have lessons learned and ingrowth from previous actions or assemblies, that means that when we engage in protest, we are doing so with an intent. We're doing so with knowing that something that just taking place can be utilized and brought back to the formation and brought back to the fold and added to the next level of whatever it is we're doing. So when we talk about the term of direct action, it means that you have a direct purpose, a direct channel, a direct intent. So key in on the word of direct or direction. You have a direction. That's why when we talked about it earlier, at the top of the page, I said going nowhere, because the whole point is you have to be able to address and define where you're going. This is why that's the first thing. You have to define it. And as you define it, now you can develop it. And then once it's developed, going back to what Bunchy was saying earlier, people or then must deal with constant calibration, which is defending it. Because if you don't defend what you develop, then it's going to get lost in time. And next thing you're going to be knowing, you're back to trying to define what it is you're about again. And it'll start all over. Instead of adding to a foundation, what we refer to as generational foundational advancement, it'll be a new discovery with each generation. In fact, the proper use of power means you have perceived the rate at which the growth will be utilized. And that's being visionary. In other words, be defined within the field of operation in society. All organizations must develop the cause in which they exist. Key platform points regarding protest discussion. Number 5, we employ education for our people that exposes the true nature of this devilish, decadent American society. We provide an education that teaches us our true legacy and our role in present day society. We operate from an education. We're saying we operate from an education. It means this is active. An educational system that gives our people a knowledge of self, having direct knowledge of self, our position in society and the world, develops our proper relationship to everything else, which goes right back to why we're saying this from the position of protest. You have to know your identity. You have to know your place as you are engaged in the public. So number 7 on our platform, we actively pursue an immediate end to police harassment, brutality, and murder of Black people and people of color. We actively pursue the eradication of internalized violence or Black on Black violence. That's important because too often, not enough emphasis is placed, and it's intentional that, especially outside looking in, is that people tend to think that we raise up in arms or we find ourselves getting agitated, find ourselves getting active, find ourselves protesting in regards to something that may happen between the police and the Black community, or between a racist individual and the Black community. But then yet it's okay for the Black community to destroy itself. And those kind of things are tried or attempted to be used against us in order to prevent us from addressing other areas of destruction and other areas of oppression that we obviously must continue to fight against. So we have to state that this is stated, we have to address that this is stated within our platform. We actively pursue the eradication of internalized violence or Black on Black violence, snitching, cooperation, or collaborating with elements of oppression. And now when we say collaboration and cooperation with elements of oppression, that don't mean that people have a conscious awareness of saying, you know what, I'm going to go start working for the oppressor. I'm going to go start doing things that's self-destructive. I'm going to go start doing things that holds our people back. Most of the time, these kind of things are subconscious because of our inability to be able to connect the dots as to what's going on and how we're weaponized against each other. So we have to identify the fact that these are internalized violence. This is a means of internalized violence. So that's important to look at it from that real position. Now, this disclaimer here: do not use the model of religion to define a political identity when addressing racism. Religious doctrine does not tackle the dynamics of race. It assumes that humanity will cohabitate for the sake of spiritual unification. The United States government, and dare I say all governments, use this lack of emotional content as a backdrop of control by tricking the global population into equating all actions through the conduit of religious factoring to make critical choices. Now, I hope that makes sense to all of y'all in terms of why I'm saying it from that point of view, because it is going into the fact that religion itself is used as a tool and a weapon to get you to move away from the logical aspects of what is really needing to be addressed, and how you're basically taught to try to have this blanket approach to fighting oppression that ties back into a religious point of view. And when you tie it back into a religious point of view, you are narrowing your scope of recognition of how you need to have more skin in the game in terms of what you fight and how you fight things. This is why we also would say, from the one cliche, by any means necessary. See, these things have fallen on deaf ears over time, and they just sound cool now. But people don't really internalize the meaning behind what is actually being said. And so this is an example to expose you to a deeper level of what that really means. Now we're about to wrap up here. So why this is important? The reason this matters is in order to know how to develop a method of addressing progressive change, you must first be able to identify patterns of failure. That is a powerful statement in itself in what we're saying here. You cannot develop methods of addressing progressive change unless you know what a pattern of failure looks like. Getting close to the end here. The Black Panther Party's cell mechanism of identity states. The identity mechanism is a filter through which the party's cultural, education, cohesive value, and principles of freedom and liberation is disseminated. Running in sync with the information mechanism, the identity mechanism ties itself, value, and work to the cause. Where people not aware of themselves will not know the enemy internally or externally, therefore be confined to failure from jump. Identity holds the key to defining moral integrity and the richness of culture. The subliminal lust of population's unbridled consumption is directly linked to our chase for collective connections. Within the identity mechanism, the BPP will foster love for all people and the obligation we must have to reach beyond individualism to embrace community empowerment. That's why we're saying what we say in regards to the identity and its role and its place and the culture that needs to be implemented when we talk about protest. Now, the word pattern is often taken for granted and thereby able to hide in plain sight. Those utilizing operations of power, the elite, take into account this fact and knowingly exert levels of blindness over its population by way of subliminal detachment, programming, and psychologically neutralizing or sterilizing the awareness and use of direct action and cohesive resistance. Again, the best approach to being invisible, undetectable, is to not be able to identify yourself or a target. This generates a cloud of chaos magic and serves to consume the subject with data, not knowledgeable information, but data and content overload. And oftentimes, I know everybody hear that word being used all the time in social media. Develop more content, develop more content, develop more content. And I'm telling you now how that word is actually playing into our subconscious to cause us to be consuming data and consuming your time and taking your time and your value and your lack of growth. Instead of having knowledgeable information, now you're dealing with content overload. Your true reality will be contrasted in a bubble of augmented reality, which sends you into a sunken place to be rendered ineffective away from real life applications of struggle. As a result of dealing with content overload, this is what happens. A bubble of augmented reality sets in. Now, final points here as we close out of awareness, the final points of awareness with the culture of protest in light of enemy counterattacks. The enemy to progressive change promotes it's okay for a subject to have elements of resistance. So this is the thing here. It's okay to have elements of resistance, because by allowing a controlled output channel, your subject is given a direct path of pressure release, aka protest. This is how they view it. If done properly, they will never build cohesion of thought or action. There may be a heightened level of pressure waves, but the political control factor can still withstand the overall containment of the body by allowing a few casualties of escape to tighten the barrier to tighten the barrier and limit breaks in power release. So what we're saying right there is that they control the channel in which protest happens, and they do so to the level where they keep everything gauged based upon emotions. That's why we have to develop and make sure we're in control of that ratio, because by releasing your emotions, releasing your anger, releasing your feelings, a lot of people go right back to sleep, because what? The organizers are not utilizing these rallies, these protests, these mass movements for the sake of drawing in more people to actual direct action. And because we don't do that, this is why C is able to take place. So know this, it is important to maintain an engine of perpetual oppressive growth. It is impossible to maintain an engine of perpetual oppressive growth forever within a finite environment. Therefore, in order to maintain protracted legacy power, the masses must be able to expand upon the perception of freedom. By clever calibration and controlled chaos, not enough change will ever occur within the required momentum to break the cycle of royal control. So as long as you provide the balanced nourishment to give in, the people will grow the appropriate appetite to take on. And this holds the key for a conditioned society, aka domesticated being. That is super important. So when you read over points A through D, make sure you internalize what's being said, because I'm talking about how they are able to keep us at bay and able to keep us from being able to be effective through means of protest based upon how we operate. And with that, last piece here is just references that y'all can refer back to get more information about what we talked about here. Any questions before we close out? Or comments? Any last questions or comments anybody got?
No, I appreciate this political education. I feel like we definitely need to push this out, more. I feel like more people need to see this in regards to just the community here locally and nationally. But it's good information for these orgs out here. I wish more of them was on tonight.
Got it.
So we definitely I'm definitely gonna keep this information on hand just so I could still pass it forward to those who couldn't make the public that couldn't make it tonight.
Got it. Well, I appreciate everybody for being on. And let's just continue to do the work. And bunch of you are more than welcome, brother, to always jump in and add your knowledge and your wisdom to the fold, brother. It's about us all working together, and we love it, brother. So please don't be a stranger, and let me jump in on some of your things as well. Let us continue to build and grow together.